and some really serious responsibilities to make sure that that never happened again. So I did some of that training in Washington, D.C., and then went off to Guatemala. And so when I was in Guatemala, I interviewed visa applicants. So I denied and issued visas. And I also did some American citizen services, which is going out and helping Americans who have serious problems when they're abroad. My visa experience in particular, I think would be something really valuable that we need in Congress. If you can believe this, right now, there is no one in our Congress who has ever issued or denied a visa, ever. People just don't have that firsthand understanding of how the immigration system really works. I'll tell you that at one point I called up our current incumbent, Tom McClintock. I called his office, and I actually asked if he had ever visited a consular section, if he'd ever been out to any of the offices where the Department of Homeland Security processes visa applications, if he had any understanding of how the system works. And his office told me no, that he had attended a naturalization ceremony once, but that's really the only contact he's ever had with the immigration system. And, that disconnect is the reason why we have people in Washington saying outrageous and sometimes offensive things when they're talking about immigration. They just don't know, what are the categories of visas? How does it work? I think at one point Trump said that he hoped that dreamers could just morph into citizens or somehow, there is no morphing that happens when we're talking about immigration. Either there's a legal pathway for someone to do something or there isn't. And, it's very clear cut and dried. And so, I think that understanding of, all the different types of visas that exist, and it would be important. I've also been in the position of trying to enforce laws that don't necessarily make a lot of sense, and that's a hard position to be in when you're the one on the front lines having to explain to someone that, they just don't fit into this category because of a technicality. And these are people's lives we're talking about. So I think that I have both the, the technical knowledge, the kind of enforcement experience, but also the compassion from having worked with a lot of people in the immigration system in a lot of different ways to really be a leader on this issue in Congress. Because, we need, I think, two critical things to happen. The first is that we need to pass a Clean Dream Act. I'm really proud to be endorsed by one of the co-founders of California Dreamers, which is a dreamer advocacy group here in our state that's very influential. And I just think a Clean Dream Act has to be priority number one when the Democrats take back the House. We know that most Americans support it. We know that the votes are actually there. If only the bill would be brought up for a vote. So when we go change control of Congress, this is something that we can accomplish, I think, almost straight away. The second thing that needs to happen is grand bipartisan immigration reform. This is just critical. And I think that we need to have a pathway to citizenship for people who are currently here, who are undocumented, who could pass background checks and pay fees. But we also do need to make some smart investments in border security. I'm completely opposed to the wall, of course. I know that amounts to wasteful government spending and wouldn't actually do anything to keep us safer in a significant way. But I think we need to make smart uses of technology to secure our southern border. I also really support actually providing funding so that we can create an effective system to track when people are leaving the U.S. So this is something that was recommended by the 9/11 Commission years and years ago. It's never been fully implemented because of a lack of funding from Congress. But incredibly, right now, if someone comes to our country with a visa that allows them to stay here for a certain amount of time, we typically have no idea when, if ever, that person leaves our country. And a lot of undocumented immigration actually starts with someone coming to the country with a valid visa and then just staying. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say to someone, you're coming to study for a certain amount of time. When that time is up, you either need to legally adjust your status or you do need to leave and go back to your home country and then apply for some other kind of visa in the future again if you want to come back. And having been a consular officer, I can tell you that it's hard when you're adjudicating applications to renew visas because in the system as it stands now, you can't necessarily tell when someone has left the U.S. after they came for a visit. You don't know if someone went for 2 weeks or if someone stayed for 5 years when they were only supposed to have been in the U.S. for 2 weeks. So I think that this is a simple improvement that we can make that would be really cost effective and could be part of, a grand negotiated reform to our immigration system.
I want to ask you a little bit about California 4th. So what are the kinds of issues that people there are really concerned with in particular?
So as I said before, our district is a beautiful place. A lot of people live here precisely because we love the great outdoors. We love the environment. And this is an area where our current representative, Tom McClintock, is far out of step with the people of our district. He's a climate change denier. He's funded by the Koch brothers. McClintock currently has a 0% rating from the League of Conservation Voters, and he's representing Lake Tahoe and Yosemite National Park. This is outrageous. It seems like a crime against nature, and people here view it that way. We know that the vast majority of people in our district understand that climate change is real. The Yale program on climate change communication actually estimates that it's about 69% of adults in our district will say climate change is real. Something like 68% believe it's a serious threat to future generations. And yet, we're being represented by someone with exactly the opposite views. So this comes up a lot. And, respect for the environment, a commitment to good stewardship of our public lands and our state and national parks that are inside our district here. Those are things that people really want to see from their representative. And again, McClintock is doing exactly the opposite. He's the chair of the subcommittee on federal lands in the House right now. And he is an enemy of public lands. He actually supports removing a lot of the protections that they enjoy right now. So this comes up, both public lands and climate change, clean air, clean water. These are all common sense things that people believe in here. And, I always say you don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat to want to breathe in clean air, to want to drink clean water. But especially I would say on climate, this is something where, it's not enough for us just to remove McClintock from office. I think it's really important that we replace him with someone who's going to be a leader on this issue. So I do support a carbon fee and dividend. I would join the Climate Solutions Caucus if elected. And, it's about protecting the environment writ large. But for our district, it's also about our way of life and our local economy. So we have a large ski industry. Millions of people a year come to our district precisely because of our mountains and outdoor recreation opportunities. And then small businesses here depend on that tourism. The economic impact ripples out through our whole economy here. We also have a fair amount of, kind of specialty, fairly small-scale agriculture here in the foothills. And the crops that are being grown really depend on the particular microclimate that we have. The temperatures that we've had here historically. And those crops are in danger now. Our citrus industry is really negatively affected when we have multiple days in the summer in a row that are 105 degrees, 110 degrees, 114 degrees. Some of the fruit that's developing can just drop off the trees. And I was speaking recently with one citrus grower here who lost 25% of their harvest last year because of those excessive temperatures and the fruit drop that it caused. So, we really value the character of our region. Whether it's the citrus or some of the winemaking that happens here, or, these are traditions that people grew up with here. And we don't want to see those industries die. We don't want to see that type of agriculture have to move to other locations because the crops simply can't be grown here anymore because of changes in the climate. So I think it's really critical that we address climate change. I hear that a lot from voters here, including Republicans. We know that this is one of the biggest crossover issues that is drawing Republicans to our campaign. Real quickly, I would also say healthcare. Tom McClintock, the incumbent, is really just callous toward his own constituents when it comes to healthcare. He actually believes that pre-existing conditions are nuisances. That's his term, nuisances. And that people just want the freedom to buy health insurance that doesn't cover those pesky nuisance conditions. And, I really take this personally because I have a genetic bone disease, as do some other members of my family. Most people have some kind of health condition that would count as a pre-existing condition. And these things are not nuisances. In some cases, pre-existing conditions can become something that's life-threatening. So I think that his attitude and his words when it comes to healthcare are really out of step with our district, especially because we have a couple of large hospitals here. We actually do have a lot of medical professionals, from nurses to doctors, here in our community, and they're up in arms about this. They don't feel that he speaks for us at all when he's talking this way about healthcare and people's serious health issues. So I think healthcare is an important issue here. And then I'd say rural broadband. So incredibly enough, we're a couple hours away from Silicon Valley, but when it comes to internet access, we're just years apart and behind. Even in our most developed counties here in our district, half the rural residents cannot access high-speed internet at any price. You just can't get it. We have an entire county, Mariposa County, where at least as of 2016, there were virtually no residential customers who could get high-speed internet. And this is a problem. It's precisely in more rural outlying areas where people need to be able to access telemedicine. They need to be able to take college classes online. Frankly, even for social isolation, it can really help seniors that are out in those areas to be able to Skype with their grandkids. And let's not even talk about small businesses. I have run into so many people, including Republicans, who tried to start small businesses out in areas where they just can't get good internet service. And it's really hard. They have to pay much more than we would pay in the more suburban parts of the district for worse service. So there are higher costs for them. It ends up taking them a lot of extra time to do basic tasks. And they're really limited in the types of advertising and promotions that they can do for their business and in their correspondence, with people who might want to come visit them or with potential clients. So I think that if we're really serious about economic development and about educational opportunity, and making sure people in rural areas have a level playing field and have a fair shot at getting ahead if they work hard, we have to be doing much more at the federal level to bring high-speed internet out into our rural communities. And I think it's flat out offensive that Tom McClintock has actually voted against federal support for rural broadband at least twice.
I have one last question for you, and that is, I know you have 3 little kids. I have 2 young sons myself, and I know what a challenge it can be to be juggling multiple things with young kids. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to be campaigning, and how you balance that, the family and campaigning?
Absolutely. So you may think it's odd or unusual to be talking to a candidate, who's a woman with 3 kids, age 5 and under. That is unusual. And when you look at our government, you'll see that working parents are really underrepresented, especially moms of young children or even school-age children. There are actually hardly any folks in that position who are currently in Congress. And I think that's part of the reason why we have the social policies we do in this country. We don't have enough people in Congress right now who actually understand how expensive daycare is, who actually understand how even little things like school schedules really impact the ability of parents to be able to be leading, to be able to be dedicating themselves to their work in the way that they want to. And, these things are really complicated to be juggling. And I get that, having been through that for years. So I think I bring an important perspective that we need in government. At the same time, I'm very realistic about the challenges of running as a candidate with a whole bunch of young kids, which I've been doing for a year at this point. And I always say that it takes a village and we have a village. So I'm really lucky that my parents also live in Roseville here, which is my hometown and where I live as well. They help us a ton. My husband's parents are retired, and so they're able to come visit sometimes, potentially for weeks at a time, and really provide us with significant support also. My husband gets a shout out. He's fantastic and has really reduced his own work that he's been doing for his job in order to do much more with our kids and, enable me to do this. I mean, after the 2016 election, he really decided that supporting me in doing this was his contribution that he could make right now to society and to our country. So I have a lot of support, and that support is really necessary. At the same time, though, I have got to say that when I went and got my PhD, there were not very many women in my PhD program. I've been pretty successful in a field in social science that's actually fairly male-dominated. I've had lots of instances where I went to a job interview once and got taken out to lunch by 11 men when I was applying for a job at a university. Frankly, I'd ended up teaching at MIT, and one of my first days at MIT, someone called me from the diversity office and actually said, "Oh, you're the first woman that your department has hired in 10 years. Can you come over to our office and tell us how you got them to hire you?" And I thought that was a little backwards. I mean, I didn't really know that fact. And I basically kind of said, I just showed up and did a good job and, am qualified for the position. I don't really have any comment on this. So that's to say that I've been in some weird kind of gender situations before. But I will tell you that until running for Congress, I have never encountered this volume of overt discrimination. I mean, just overt discrimination. And it took me a long time to put a name to it, but I really think it is, and it's particular to, I think, not just being a woman, but being a woman with young children. So I've had numerous people, and this is people who are Democrats. In many cases, this is Democratic women in our district and people who are leaders of our local Democratic Party will say things to me like, I know you're the most qualified Democrat in this race, but, you have young kids, and I just can't get over that. Seriously. And I get these comments all the time. I get them in writing. And, I've just never encountered something before in my life where people would say to me, you are actually the best person for the job, but there is something about you as an individual that's unchangeable, just a characteristic about you that makes me think we can't support you. And that has been really frustrating to me. And I think it's important